So are there any other nuggets you want to share from your Motown years? Like, let's just start with recording, and then we'll talk a little bit about mastering and some stuff.
Okay, well, I started out mastering, actually.
Ah,
But, I mean, recording wise, it's mostly just doing as much live as you can.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the dynamics are never right on an overdub.
Yeah.
I mean, then you have to start compressing everything and fabricating dynamics
And latency and
and whereas if you got everybody in a room together, the human being just does it.
so, but that also means rehearse your ass off before you get there.
Yeah.
I mean, really put in the sweat and,
Oh yeah.
not like once a week, like, get in and work
Yeah.
every day.
Oh yeah. You gotta do something that's worth recording.
Hmm. Well, I just see, it's hard to speak up in certain situations, but I see a lot of mistakes happening,
Oh yeah.
And like, I want to say something, but like, I also know that everybody has their own vibe, and their own way of doing it. But like, I just think, like, for instance, in mastering, right? I've been in some mastering sessions, and I understand I've been learning from you for 20 years before I even attempted to do it. And I go in and I see people making, like, and these are in big studios, right? Like, making kind of major mistakes, in my opinion. And, you can't really say anything, but like, are there any nuggets that you can share, like what to look for, what to avoid? I mean, let me just start by saying Bob was mastering a record for me today, and I looked at it and it sounded like so much better than when I gave it to him. And I worked really hard on the mix. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, yeah, I'm just adding some low here and cutting some high here. And there's, and I got a crossover and a little compression. And I was like, holy shit, this thing sounds so much better. Whereas if I was in another studio with another mastering, not all, there are some great ones. Bob Katz is still around, right? Bob's still around, right? Yeah. And a couple other guys that are really good. But I see people doing too much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is the classic problem.
And it's knowing where, like, I don't know if maybe they're not listening. I fall into this too sometimes. I think I've gotten kind of good at, from what I've learned from you. But like, sometimes you fall into, you're not listening as through as you can, maybe, because when I saw what you were doing, I'm like, holy shit, that sounds amazing. And maybe if I did it myself, I would have been doing much more.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of finding those one or two moves that make it pop into focus.
Mm-hmm. And are you doing a lot of like volume riding when it needs it?
Not that much.
Not that much
anymore.
I guess there was an era where that was popular.
Well, everything you get today has so much compression.
Mm-hmm. You don't need to ride it so much.
All that, you can't. It's almost the opposite. You have to unride it.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah.
But, no, I mean, you used to do that, and I still do. The clip gain thing is
Oh, right. We should talk about that. So
very handy.
Yeah. So in Pro Tools and in most DAWs, because I use Cubase and Ableton, and I've even tried Reaper. So this is the edit window behind us where we're recording this audio. So in the edit window, when it's done recording, you'll see the waveform, right, of what we're saying. Well, and then there'll be a number, right? It's defaults to 0. That's the clip gain, right? And what I have found, thanks to Bob, the faders in Pro Tools are post, unless you change them. They default post, right? And
Can't change them.
You can't change them. They default post. So the way you can control dynamics and do it smarter is by, and rather than using the volume tool, is using clip gain, editing sections and adjusting them to taste, correct?
Yeah.
To balance everything. Like when I do a vocal, because you're going to chop it up, you're going to comp it, I go through really carefully to make sure that, yeah, it builds and it feels natural, but that everything is in balance before I even do compression or anything else, or EQ or whatever.
Yeah, you want to do the least compression you can get away with, because at some point the compression castrates it.
Mm-hmm.
You know it's going to happen on the radio.
Right. Or even streaming.
Yeah.
Because they're doing their own thing
so
to it.
You want to be...
So clip gain, that's a really big thing. I mean, I'm off. It's funny because I have a friend of mine, an online buddy who's in music school, and I think he just graduated, and he was having troubles with Pro Tools, and he told me what was going on, and I'm like, well, just use the clip gain. And he just got out of music school and was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, okay, forget the volume rides, do it this way. And he was like, oh, wow, that's cool, right? Like, like this is awesome. The tools are there.
Yeah.
What else?
What
do you think we should let them know that's important? So we got live performance, no headphones, give them some
I mean, basically it's all, somebody put it the best I've ever heard, is it's all downhill from the microphone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like you want to not screw it up.
So like, yeah, when you were at the radio station, you didn't have EQ. You didn't have compression.
No.
So everything relied on how you set those microphones.
Yeah.
And how much would you tweak them? Like you'd go back in and listen and go, oh, we just got to turn it this much or move it a centimeter or a couple of inches, and that was your EQ.
Yeah. Well, that was your volume. That was
your mix.
That was your mix. But it wasn't even that hard because nobody had headphones on. They were playing it live in the room, and you could just, have them warm up on something maybe that they weren't going to perform.
Mm-hmm.
So the performance is fresh, and just go in the room and listen. And
well, there's something else going on there that's different today too. So ego, because if you have headphones, right, you're just gonna bashing away, because you're hearing yourself. If you're in a room with 4 or 5, whatever people, but there's only 4 mics, you have to be able to hear them to even show off. Yeah. And how, to use your ego. So like if you're isolated, it just makes it worse.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it also forces you into having a reasonable arrangement.
Yeah. Well, arrangement's like one of the biggest things I learned early on, that like everything is teetering on a record, on the arrangement. Let's assume you record it, as you said.
Today that's our biggest problem.
Is arrangement.
Is we don't have arrangers anymore.
That's a good point. It's a good point.
I mean, it's stupid easy to record a good arrangement.
Yeah. If you have, but like you guys had Paul Reiser and all those great people that did those amazing arrangements. But like here's a great tip for you. So John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, his first job was an arranger. Right? Mm-hmm. George Martin was basically an arranger, because in England, what I found out from living there is all those guys were called arrangers, not producers originally. Mm-hmm. So that was John Paul Jones's first gig, and it turned out that the records he arranged, there's no producer's name on it. He's actually the producer, but he was a professional arranger, and he brought it to Led Zeppelin.
that's Owen Bradley's history.
There you go. There you go.
He hit the big time arranging in Chicago for the band that Perry Como started out with. And he got hired. He was from Nashville, and he got hired by WSM in Nashville because they had just talked NBC into taking the Grand Ole Opry, and they wanted to do some pop music. And so they brought Bradley in from Chicago.
That makes sense, though, because the big producers back then were great arrangers. So that's a tip, right? So if you want to be great and take it over the top, and I mean, Billie Eilish's records are really amazingly arranged, but I'd go back and listen to the great arrangers who are like, Nelson Riddle was an amazing arranger, Paul Reiser for Motown.
Well, one thing about him, Bradley was unusual in that he was a piano player. And the only other piano player that I remember is the guy that did Barry White in L.A.
Oh, yeah. What was his name again?
Whose name I can't think of.
Yeah, because Ed Green played on all that stuff.
Yeah, but he was a keyboard player. But damn near all the others were horn players.
Mm.
And in many cases, trumpet players.
Interesting.
And stop and think about it. They think in counterpoint. They don't think in chords.
Well, vocals are horn lines, the best vocals, right?
It's counterpoint.
Right. Well, that's fascinating.
It's not chords.
So, yeah, and one of the things I did was learning classical music. My grandfather would sit me there and go, hey, listen, see, there's where the oboe comes in, and that's a French horn, like listen to great horn sections and orchestras. I mean, it's not that different from Mozart and Beethoven and everything, really. I mean, it's all the same, you know what I mean? It's all coming. So that's a really good piece of advice, is to get out there.
Bach was the big keyboard guy, but those other guys weren't particularly keyboard guys.
Yeah, they just did it because that's what you did when you went to music school and you went to conservatory.
Yeah, but it counterpoint.
Counterpoint. That's what does make a good arrangement. So study your horn parts, study the great arrangers.
Don't be afraid to count rests. I mean, what's my theory of why all these guys are trumpet players. And Quincy Jones.
Yeah, Quincy was amazing.
And Paul Reiser is a trombone player.
Is he? Yeah.
I mean, right down the line, they were horn players.
Quincy's arrangements are incredible.
Yeah. Well, every trumpet player has sat on a bandstand and counted rests a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, space is important. Space. Right? Not playing.
Not having more than a couple things playing at once.
Bringing them in and out intelligently. Complementary frequencies, you know what I mean? Like, it's funny when you work on a keyboard, which I've been doing for this concerto thing I was scoring, you pull up an instrument, that's its range, not this. Do you know what I mean? That's its range. The next one might be this, and then the next one's down here. It's fantastic because it forces you to be like, oh, okay, that's all I got.
Yeah. And one thing about the Motown guys, the producers had all been, most of them had been signed to a label singing doo-wop.
Mm.
They were doo-wop singers.
Yeah. Well, when I met
and I posted a 2-hour-long interview with Lamont Dozier of Joe Smith of Warner's.
Sure.
Interviewing him for 2 hours. I stuck that up on my Facebook page.
Oh, I'll have to look for that.
And it's amazing. It will. In some ways, it'll tell you more about Motown than the documentary they just did. The combination of the two gets it across. I mean, he had a few things somewhat wrong, or he had, jumped to some conclusions about some early experiences that weren't actually the case later on.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean,
But on the other hand, remembering stuff from that long ago.
It's hard.
This was recorded in the late 80s.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Apparently. And Smith, I mean, it's a fabulous thing. Smith recorded everybody who was anybody in the record business who was still alive in the 80s. And then he recently donated the whole shebang to the Library of Congress.
No kidding.
And so this is on the Library of Congress website.
Oh, cool. So yeah, the resources are out there for people to check this stuff out. Is there anything else you want to add before we...
Anyway, but the point I was trying to get at is that these guys were doo-wop singers.
Yeah.
And so, people talk about Jamerson, but what would happen is these guys would give him a figure. And then he'd do a full-out jazz improvisation on that figure.
Right.
And that's what became the Motown bass line.
Interesting. Oh, very interesting. Well, I mean, Dion told me once, like he was just imitating the Apollo horn section. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, so when Lieber and Stoller wrote all those songs, all those things.
There's interviews with them.
Oh, cool. Doc Pomus, they were all horns.
Yeah.
Charts, really.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But, in a lot of ways, it hasn't changed. I mean, what's changed is no budgets and, cheap production has replaced a lot of the older stuff.
Yeah.
To a certain degree, too, I think the harming the value of the music. I mean, we kind of went from records that people actually sat down and listened to. I mean, in the 1970s, you'd have somebody come over to the house and you'd sit down and you'd listen to an album.
Mm-hmm.
And today it's like it's all background music.
Yeah.
And that's why people don't think it's worth paying for.
Well, it's like David Ogilvy said, once you give something away for nothing, it's hard to get people to pay for it.
Yeah.
So.
But I think, I don't know, I think there's some big opportunities. One of them is streaming. So, I mean, today's streaming sounds just like FM radio did in the early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
The automated blah, 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 blah. It's still live DJs.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody's going to figure out that, I mean, Apple kind of is getting there, but it's really, to work, it's got to be more local. And have
more local flavor.
Have a live jock. Well, basically you play the music that people are buying, that local people are buying. Figure out some way to find out. Maybe Apple will give regional statistics or something. I don't know. Figure out some way so that you can kind of get the common experience of your local town.
That makes sense.
And then basically be a companion listening to the music. Yeah. Instead of, in the 80s, they got into this thing of the DJ as God.
Yeah, thing. That went a little, it always goes a little over the top, but they take
it. Whereas the old top 40 Drake Chenault format was the DJ was a companion. And I think they could get back to that very effectively.
Right. Yeah, that'd be super cool. And there are.
I mean, that's a big opportunity, and certainly there are opportunities for doing shows in homes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've been trying with that.
Yeah, they're kind of, although there's this, I don't know, I couldn't believe this outfit is doing an internet thing where the musicians don't get paid.
Oh. Why is it always the musicians don't get paid?
Yeah, well, musicians get used every opportunity.
Yeah, that's don't get used. I've been telling you this.
But
warning.
But the thing of it is, living room concert. I mean, Prince started. I was telling this story, and this guy used to work for Prince told me, "Hey, he started out doing living room concerts,
Mm-hmm.
and then when it was getting too full for the living rooms, they'd rent hotel ballrooms because nobody in Minneapolis would book a black act."
Oh, wow, okay.
So he was promoting his own shows in hotels.
Wow.
And it's like he built his whole career starting in living rooms.
Pretty cool.
And there's a similar story. I mean, jazz originated in lofts. You know, people inviting musicians in and having parties and kind of thing. And San Francisco, the whole San Francisco rock scene started out in people's living rooms. People who were activists. A lot of them had moved to San Francisco because a lot of Greenwich Village had gotten gentrified, and a lot of the Greenwich Village crowd moved to San Francisco. And so those guys were in San Francisco, and so a lot of the college kids who thought they were cool moved to San Francisco, and there was a neighborhood that had been mostly African descendants that you could rent like a 10-room Victorian house for like $75-$80 a month.
Huh. Wow, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it had been kind of a rough neighborhood, but they basically, these kids would get 10 people together, rent one of these houses, and then they would cover their living expenses by having a Friday night or Saturday night, once or twice a month, get together where people paid $5 to get in. And
well, so you're saying if we got back to that where it was more intimate and
but that's where that whole scene came from. Was doing that, and then what happened was there was another related group that were doing socialist plays in the park, and the city was not happy. The city politicians were not happy about this, and a bunch of the actors got arrested for pot, and the director of the theater company was a guy named Bill Graham. And so Bill, first he goes to the Musicians Union and said, "Hey, I want to do a benefit and get these guys out of jail." He didn't realize that the Musicians Union in San Francisco at that time only spoke Italian. And they told him what he could do with his benefit in no uncertain terms. It was Mob City. So he wasn't sure what to do. And a friend of mine who was the stage manager knew about this scene and said, "Well, why don't we get a bunch of these house bands and put on a benefit and they found the cheapest venue in San Francisco that had been doing a couple gospel concerts a month, was all it did.
Mm-hmm.
So they rented the Fillmore Auditorium. And the rest is history.
Yeah. And we don't have enough promoters today. We do need
We
more.
need a new generation of promoters. Because what we've got, I mean, the guys who are doing it now are the guys who were assistants to Bill Graham.
Sure. We need...
I mean, a bunch of old farts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we need new blood.
I mean, it's a huge opportunity sitting there to do.
And there are end runs that can be done.
Yeah.
And just
There always are.
But like, don't follow what everybody else does is what I want to say, right? Like, just to get back to Billie Eilish for 1 second, her and her brother made those records in her bedroom, in his bedroom. Like, it's all them. There's nothing else. And the thing that impressed me the most, I was telling Bob this earlier, is like, you know, people turn me on to stuff all the time, and you'll be listening, and then there's this pretty voice, and there's some, like, you know, atmospheric and bubbling thing, and then, you know, the big, like, overproduced massive chorus. No, she doesn't do that. It's just like, you know, sultry and mysterious and dark, and they don't even like use a lot of reverb on her voice. Instead, you know, like, they found an end around, so it can be done. You know, you just don't. But they did it by not following. Every song of hers I was listening to, I'm like, okay, this one's got to have the big thing. No, it doesn't. Oh, wow, that's cool. And yet she's huge, right? Adele got it, and I've heard people accuse Adele, criticize her, I mean. But the thing is, her voice makes you feel something, right? You can't teach ache. I've said this before in these videos to my nephew. Mm-hmm. You can't teach ache. If it makes people feel something, that's the most important thing. So there are ends around. Just, I call it the Costanza principle from Seinfeld. Don't do whatever, you know, you do the opposite of what everybody else does, and it's better. You find success, you get a job with the New York Yankees,
well, you
get a hot, rich girlfriend.
And you find, I mean, you have to find a way around. I mean, the thing is, everybody and their brother's doing the same thing.
Exactly.
Trying to compete.
Thing. Right.
And so you have to completely get around that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the Beatles are the ultimate example. The vice president of A&R of Capitol at that time told me the Beatles were successful in spite of anything Capitol or EMI did.
I mean,
he said they completely pulled the rug from under everybody.
I mean, it's happened time and again. Bob Dylan was turned down by Vanguard and Folkways and all that. And Alanis Morissette's breakthrough album was turned down by every label, you know? Like, that's good.
Yeah.
You know, if that means it is different and it's not like anything else and it's going to be unique and special.
The suits are always going to go for the imitation.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Anyway, thanks, Bob. I appreciate you coming in and chatting with me and talking to Anthony and everybody else out there.
Okay.
And I highly recommend, Bob's on the web. You can find Bob. He's out there. He's mastering. He does everything I do and a lot of other people. And he's amazing and he's generous and he's smart and wise. I've learned more from him than anybody else in the business, and which I thank you for again. Mm-hmm. And you find him. He's on the web. It's audiomastery.com?
Well, there's a website, Audio Mastery.
Yeah.
There's, Hyperback is still up.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah.
In fact, I got to get a hold of the guy that built Audio Mastery because it's not passing messages.
Oh, okay.
On from that.
But you know.
But it's around. I mean, the key is the weird spelling of my name.
Yeah, it's Olhsson. Olhsson. You'll find Bob, or just
my
comment.
grandfather came up with that.
Olhsson.
Well, he wanted to be unique. See, they didn't have surnames in Scandinavia.
No, I know. They just
around
had
1900.
Petter's son.
Yeah. So you're
Mikkel's daughter.
Yeah. But your sisters could be Signy's daughter, and you could be Petter's son or Ole's son, and it was all kind of kept straight at the local church.
Yeah, the church still has records. That's where I found my family's records.
But they were in big trouble if, as soon as people could go more than 500 miles from home.
Yeah.
It all got messed up.
That's why Pedersen.
So everybody had to make up a surname, and his dad was an Ole, so he did it, but he wanted it to be a unique name, so he spelled it Olhsson.
Yeah, this is unique. You don't see it very often.
And so there's a few of them in Sweden, probably near Malung, where I mean they were probably all cousins or relatives of some kind. And then there's just me and my wife and my daughter, and I'm not sure of others in the U.S.
So he'll be easier to find.
So it's relatively easy to find. It's kind of.
But comment below if you, or ask me. They can go to my website and I'll give them your email.
Yeah.
Find Bob.
Yeah, but it's wild. Yeah.
All right. Till next time. See you, Anthony. All right. We'll have something new and groovy for you. Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
All right. Peace.